And joining us on the phone line to further unpack this is Chief Economist Dr. Azar Jammine. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Prime. Why do you think Moody's has taken this decision to review these SEOs?
If one reads the lines between the lines of what the Moody's statement suggested, that namely that they are afraid of the state-owned enterprises' liquidity position, it suggests that they are concerned that these SOEs will not be able to gain access to finance to fund their infrastructural investment projects in the future. And that is, I believe, a function of the kind of situation that has arisen since Future Growth decided to cut off funding to these institutions. The fear now is that if these institutions cannot get such funding, then they will not be able to spend on the infrastructural development projects that are required for them to be sustainable and to achieve their goals for social upliftment.
How would this affect South Africa's economy if a downgrade in either one or all of these SEOs had to take place?
Well, one of the issues here that is relevant is that Moody's is not the only credit rating agency. There are Standard & Poor's and Fitch, and in fact Moody's current credit rating is 2 notches above junk status. So even if it were to downgrade the credit rating, it need not be the beginning of a downward spiral of the rand and et cetera, et cetera. It's early days, one cannot be sure, and the fact is that no firm decision has been made yet to downgrade these credit ratings. Obviously, a lot will depend on developments on the political front over the next few weeks, and in particular, of course, the content and delivery of the medium-term budget policy statement in a month's time, which will give clues as to whether government is really determined to get to grips with improving the management of state-owned enterprises.
Now, Eskom has come out and said in a statement that it's unfortunate and they plan to meet Moody's to kind of discuss this. How does this work from here on? Can they meet and, could this downgrade or this review rather not turn into a downgrade, or how does it work?
That's exactly what I suggested. Firstly, Eskom has to try and persuade the credit rating agency in talks that it is indeed implementing policies which will improve governance and facilitate better access to funding in the future. And secondly, we have to look at what the government itself, and especially National Treasury, says in return. But and obviously that leads to the third issue, and that is to have greater certainty that the current National Treasury team will remain in place in the foreseeable future and not be replaced by persons who are seen to be interested more than anything in doing deals that benefit themselves rather than the country at large.
Dr. Azar Jammine, thank you so much for your time there. That is the Chief Economist on the phone line. To further unpack this, we have our ANN7 business editor, Clive Ramathibela Smith, who joins us in studio. Thank you so much for joining us. A very good morning, and again, welcome to the team.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Firstly, let's talk about Eskom. Why review this SEO when it's been quite obvious that improvements have been made? What are your thoughts here?
I think improvements have been made, but there's still a lot to cover, you know what I mean? So, unfortunately, the political sphere has not been in favor of our parastatals. And what that has done, it has created a little bit of doubt. Investors, I promise you, my dear, they'd hate anything that is suspicious. So even though we could have done all the work that we've done, I mean, I think you still remember earlier on in this year, what started happening is that we had the finance minister together with the president traveling around the world, going to talk to the likes of Standard & Poor's, the likes of Fitch as well, to say to them, listen, we are going to get our act in order, we're going to get the house in order, everything will be fine. And the actual fact, shortly after that, we started to see the rand strengthen quite considerably, we started to see economic activity increase, We started to see our PMI numbers go on the up. So what that made is that there was a bit of confidence that was retained, that came back into the economy and convinced our investors that things are looking very good. If you look at the actual fact, the second quarter GDP numbers, which were up by 3.3%, it does tell you that there was confidence, there was market participation back again in play. Unfortunately, then we had a little bit of a squabble where there was an investigation against the finance minister, and that sort of brought back that uncertainty again. And so that's what we're starting to see now play out, because, you know, there's been investigations into ASCOM. They had to answer to Parliament, to the parliamentary committee. They sounded all bold and strong. Unfortunately, they didn't convince the investors, unfortunately not.
Talking about convincing, do you believe, in your professional opinion, that ASCOM will be able to persuade Moody's?
It's very easy to convince anyone if you've got proof. You know, it's no point trying to paint this wonderful picture when the reality is on the other side. So what you want to do is to create three key elements in economics that makes you stand out into the creditability or credit viability that you need to have, so that parastatal can be worked out properly. So you have to have clarity. So you want to know what your financials look like, what the balance sheet is like, what are the projects that are coming up. That has to be clear, so that it's not difficult for a financier to say, well, what is this for? You know what I mean? So the second thing that you need to do is get your perspective in order. So what is your perspective? So if you've got projects, what are the timelines? And we know that has been a problem, because, you know, with Kusili and Busile, they've taken much longer than they were supposed to. So the finance is looking at what is it that you're doing to curb or to divert that risk, for example. So that's why perspective is very important. The last and final bit that is always important is transparency. I know it's a difficult thing to do, especially in a government like ours, but if you show transparency to any financier, anyone in the world, they're more than willing to put down their foot and put money there. By the way, money is there, it's available, we've got sovereign funds around the world. The question is, can we attract it, and can we have a good rating for us to be able to attract those assets?
And do you think, for example, ASCOM has that? I mean, it's been saying that it's seen improvements in its financial profile, its turnaround plan, health liquidity position, no load shedding for a year. Do you think this is enough?
Yeah, well, those lights are still on, so I suppose that's a very good thing. I think that they've done relatively well. I think there are still concerns in terms of the timelines of some of the projects that have engaged themselves into. There's still a question of alternative energy that's played into the realm. Why is it that if you're using alternative energy sources outside the grid of ASCOM, that you're still paying the same rate as one? So there's no much competition. So they're still very monopolized. But I think what the UK can teach us in this particular perspective is that in 1996, when they decided to deregulate, it actually meant that you can get the same electricity, same gas, but at an alternative biller. So somebody who bills you will be completely different, but it will be cheaper depending on the service provider. So that's what we need to start looking at. That's what transparency is. That's when you show that you can be part of the grid, and if you can produce energy at a lesser cost than we do, then you should charge that cost. You shouldn't be part of the grid and still pay the same amount you would pay at ASCOM. So I think that's where the competitive edge is missing.
Okay, and let's talk about Land Bank, which released fantastic results yesterday. Yet they are one of the SEOs being reviewed.
I was just as shocked. I was like, well, there's a celebration of good news, and then the reason why they've done that, I think Moody's here, is that they're in a bad mood. No, that's not true.
Bad mood. So run the economy.
Exactly. So I think the reason why you have Moody's coming out there and saying, look, even the land bank and some of the projects have slowed down. If you look at actual numbers, even though they were positive by north of 26%, the issues that are underlying, especially when it comes to resolving the issue of drought, supporting black farmers, and how that program has been coming through, there has been very little progress on that. In actual fact, commercializing of black farmers has been so slow that we haven't seen much movement. Even the guys who actually, in actual fact, we've seen a retreat in terms of them participating in the bigger structure of the economy. So you can't say you're going to be commercializing a farmer and then there's no market for that farmer to actually send their goods to or to sell to. So they're always still relying, unfortunately, on the bigger guys, and that's what the problem is with this particular land bank. But other than that, I think the other thing maybe that might be of concern to Moody's is that the whole SOE structure has to be revised, and that's why perhaps maybe President Zuma wants to head up that particular commission. And maybe that's the reason why he wants to, because there's been a little bit, unfortunately, of untrustworthiness that has now fallen on all the parastatals, which is wrong, obviously, because you don't want to have a blanket effect, because we still have parastatals that do well, such as your Transnet, for example, that have been doing relatively well. But everybody now gets a blanket approach because of the fact that it seems like they all fall in the same pot. Hopefully you don't burn the whole pot. But
And lastly, before we let you go, some predictions out of these 5 SOEs, which do you think are going to be downgraded?
I think that is where you will see the power of government and liaison. It's very, very important that all SOEs are on the same page. They have to negotiate, they have to go and lobby, they have to go back and talk to the agencies and convince them not to do any movement on the downgrading. Some of them are better than others, like the professor said there, but the important thing that we need to remember is if they want to have a success, they must work as a collective and try and convince the rating agencies not to downgrade any of them at all, so that we can have a better prospect. Because remember, if one of them goes on the downgrade, because they serve such important services to the community, it means that obviously that money has to come from somewhere, and unfortunately it's you and I who will have to fit that bill.